In today's video, we're going to be reading papal encyclicals and statements by popes in support of veganism. Shocking, right? I want to be really clear from the beginning in defining our terms. As a Catholic, I reject the popular sentiment amongst a lot of vegans that as humans, we are never allowed to use animals for food, clothing, or animal testing. I choose to not eat or clothe myself with animals and to not use makeup tested on animals because of the extreme cruelty and horrific living conditions of these animals in the 21st century. Also because of the devastating environmental impact of the factory farm system and the fishing industry on our earth. Christianity teaches from the beginning that God gives humans dominion over animals, which we're going to define what dominion even means in Catholicism, completely different from what a lot of people think. But I'm arguing that the current factory farm system of producing meat, dairy, and eggs is so barbaric, such horrific conditions, and the environmental impact is devastating as well. #1 contributor to global greenhouse gases, #1 contributor to water pollution and deforestation. The Vatican has a lot to say about environmentalism and caring for our earth. Yes, we're going to read from Laudato Si. Even how we treat and use animals is discussed in this encyclical, and we're going to explore all of that in this video. #1. Animal testing featuring Pope Francis. We are going to read a ton from Laudato Si in this video, which is a 2015 papal encyclical that is binding on all Catholics. It is specifically about environmentalism and creation inspired by the writings of past popes. I am also going to be reading from non-magisterial documents, so I'm not going into this video saying papal infallibility statements. We're just gonna read diverse literature relevant to the topic at hand. I want to start by talking about Catholicism rejecting some forms of animal testing. Again, this is from Laudato Si, the 2015 papal encyclical. While human intervention on plants and animals is permissible when it pertains to the necessities of human life, the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that experimentation on animals is morally acceptable only if it remains within reasonable limits and contributes to caring for or saving human lives. The Catechism firmly states that human power has limits and that it is contrary to human dignity to cause animals to suffer or die needlessly. All such use and experimentation requires a religious respect for the integrity of creation. So Pope Francis didn't straight up say, don't buy makeup tested on animals, but it says morally acceptable only if it pertains to caring for or saving human lives. So an example would be the life-saving medications for my bipolar disorder, the mood stabilizers, and antipsychotics. It's saying that our dominion over animals has limits, and that animals shouldn't needlessly suffer, needlessly die. Is it necessary in 2020 to consume meat, dairy, and eggs to survive? Absolutely not. #2, factory farms featuring Pope Benedict XVI. Here's a quote specifically about eating animals and rejecting factory farming said by Pope Benedict XVI before he became the Pope, which is important to note, but this is still significant. When he was Cardinal Ratzinger in God and the World, a conversation with Peter Seewald in 2002, he says this in response to being asked if Catholics can eat meat. We can see that animals are given into our care, that we cannot just do whatever we want with them. Animals too are God's creatures, and even if they do not have the same direct relation to God that man has, they are creatures of his will. Creatures we must respect as companions in creation. Man should always maintain his respect for these creatures, but he knows at the same time that he is not forbidden to take food from them. Certainly, a sort of industrial use of creatures, so that geese are fed in such a way as to produce as large a liver as possible, or hens live so packed together that they become just caricatures of birds. This degrading of living creatures to a commodity seems to me, in fact, to contradict the relationship of mutuality that comes across in the Bible. Wow! So as a cardinal, he is condemning factory farming. And to be clear, when he's talking about hens living so packed together, that's talking about free-range eggs. When you go to the grocery store and they charge more because there's a label that says free range, that means they're in a giant warehouse, just chicken, 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 barely able to move, and the other option is keeping them in tiny cages. It is not ethical, and this is the vast majority of food that you're getting at the grocery store and at restaurants. Another quote I want to read that is specifically against factory farming is from the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. This is from their document, "For I was hungry and you gave me food," in part 5. Catholic teaching about the stewardship of creation leads us to question certain farming practices, such as the operation of massive confined animal feeding operations. We believe that these operations should be carefully regulated and monitored so that environmental risks are minimized and animals are treated as creatures of God. And here's another quote by Saint Pope John Paul II in Peace with God the Creator, Peace with All Creation from 1990. Respect for life and for the dignity of the human person extends also to the rest of creation, which is called to join man in praising God. Number 3, the meaning of dominion. A lot of Protestants and Catholics have this idea that because we have dominion over the earth, we do not have to take care of the environment or be sweet to animals. It's ours to use and abuse and ruin if we want to. The Catholic Church leadership thoroughly rejects this idea. Common sense does too. Imagine if your dad gifted you with a car or with a house. Would you needlessly destroy it and not do upkeep and repairs? Wouldn't you want to keep it beautiful? In speaking about climate change and the extinction of species in Laudato Si, paragraph 33, Pope Francis says, "It is not enough, however, to think of different species merely as potential resources to be exploited, while overlooking the fact that they have value in themselves. Each year sees the disappearance of thousands of plant and animal species which we will never know, which our children will never see, because they have been lost forever. The great majority become extinct for reasons related to human activity. Because of us, thousands of species will no longer give glory to God by their very existence, nor convey their message to us. We have no such right." The practice of factory farming leads to the extinction of many species and, like I said, is the #1 contributor to global greenhouse gases. In Brazil alone, 3 million acres of the Amazon rainforest have been torn down to make land for cattle to graze and for more land to grow corn and soybeans, which will be fed to animals in the factory farms. In the US, 260 million acres of forest have been torn down for this purpose. 37% of methane pollution comes from factory farms, and methane contributes to global warming 20 times more than carbon dioxide, which, as I mentioned, with millions of acres of trees being torn down, that releases so much carbon dioxide as well. All of this contributes to global warming, literal #1 contributor, with an after effect being the extinction of many animal and plant species. The sheer amount of meat, dairy, and eggs consumed in Western countries today is this huge increase from the past. And starting in the 1960s, the factory farm system was invented to keep up with this increase of eating animal products. Another environmental nightmare is the fishing industry, especially deep sea fishing, where there are giant, powerful nets thrown into the ocean that completely dismantle coral reefs and the entire undersea ecosystem, catching all sorts of animals, including sharks and whales and dolphins, into the nets. 60% of coral reefs around the world are being damaged and in danger of completely dying out. This is from overfishing, and like I said, where meat, dairy, and eggs, it's been this exponential increase in how much we're eating. Same with fish. People around the world are just eating way more fish than we used to. Here's another statement by Saint Pope John Paul II and the Ecumenical Patriarch of the Orthodox Church, Patriarch Bartholomew. This is from the Common Declaration of Environmental Ethics. At the beginning of history, man and woman sinned by disobeying God and rejecting his design for creation. Among the results of this first sin was the destruction of the original harmony of creation. If we examine carefully the social and environmental crisis which the world community is facing, we must conclude that we are still betraying the mandate God has given us to be stewards, called to collaborate with God in watching over creation in holiness and wisdom. Next, we're going to read from Pope Benedict XVI, his papal encyclical Caritas in Veritate. This is from paragraph 48. The environment is God's gift to everyone, and in our use of it, we have a responsibility towards the poor, towards future generations, and towards humanity as a whole. In nature, the believer recognizes the wonderful result of God's creative activity, which we may use responsibly to satisfy our legitimate needs, material or otherwise, while respecting the intrinsic balance of creation. If this vision is lost, we end up either considering nature an untouchable taboo, or on the contrary, abusing it. Neither attitude is consonant with the Christian vision of nature as the fruit of God's creation. Nature expresses a design of love and truth. It is prior to us, and it has been given to us by God as the setting of our life. Nature speaks to us of the Creator and his love for humanity. It is destined to be recapitulated in Christ at the end of time. Thus, it too is a vocation. Nature is at our disposal, not as a heap of scattered refuse, but as a gift of the Creator who has given it an inbuilt order, enabling man to draw from it the principle needed in order to till it and keep it. It is also necessary to reject the opposite position, which aims at total technical dominion over nature, because the natural environment is more than raw material to be manipulated at our pleasure. It is a wondrous work of the Creator, containing a grammar which sets forth ends and criteria for its wise use, not its reckless exploitation. Today, much harm is done to development precisely as a result of these disordered notions. Reducing nature merely to a collection of contingent data ends up doing violence to the environment and even encouraging activity that fails to respect human nature itself. Pollution from factory farming is also a factor affecting wildlife. In 2017, toxic waste from factory farm runoff in the US, mostly from the meat company Tyson, led to an 8,000-mile dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. A dead zone is a place where no marine life can survive. Manure and fertilizer leaked into canals and riverways, and it created all of this algae which completely deprives the water from oxygen, and literally no animals can survive there. They all had to flee from their homes. 8,000-mile dead zone from factory farms. It's outrageous. But it's not surprising. This is our new normal. When I learned all of this information and watched footage inside the factory farms, I decided to completely give up consuming any animal products. But in regards to the message of this video, if every single person watching and if every 1 billion Catholic in the world chose to just decrease the amount of animal products that you're consuming. You could alternate meat one day, vegetarian the next day, meat, vegetarian. You could go vegan 1 day a week. You could go back to how it always was, where on Fridays, Catholics don't eat meat every Friday. Just think, what individually can you do to alleviate the environmental disaster a little bit? What can you do to help the ocean stay beautiful and stay clean? What can you do to prevent some of the deforestation, to prevent some of those animals from being factory farmed and slaughtered? As Catholics, we all have a role to play in the environmental disaster going on, and we all just need to do something, and decreasing animal products is the #1 way that you can directly help what's going on in the world. Number 4, animals are sacred. Let's go back to Laudato Si by Pope Francis. In paragraph 67, he says, "We are not God. The earth was here before us, and it has been given to us. This allows us to respond to the charge that Judeo-Christian thinking, on the basis of the Genesis account, which grants man dominion over the earth. Genesis 1:28 has encouraged the unbridled exploitation of nature by painting him as domineering and destructive by nature. This is not a correct interpretation of the Bible as understood by the Church. Although it is true that Christians have, at times, incorrectly interpreted the scriptures, nowadays we must forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion over the earth justifies absolute domination over other creatures. Clearly, the Bible has no place for a tyrannical anthropocentrism unconcerned for other creatures. Together with our obligation to use the earth's goods responsibly, we are called to recognize that other living beings have a value of their own in God's eyes. By their mere existence, they bless him and give him glory. And indeed, the Lord rejoices in all his works. By virtue of our unique dignity and our gift of intelligence, we are called to respect creation and its inherent laws, for the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. In our time, the Church does not simply state that other creatures are completely subordinated to the good of human beings, as if they have no worth in themselves and can be treated as we wish. The Catechism clearly and forcefully criticizes a distorted anthropocentrism. Each creature possesses its own particular goodness and perfection. Each of the various creatures, willed in its own being, reflects in its own way a ray of God's infinite wisdom and goodness. Man must therefore respect the particular goodness of every creature to avoid any disordered use of things." I want to show you the way that animals are treated and produced in the US and other countries. And this is the default. This is the majority. This is not a small amount of cases. I know it is so hard to watch a lot of these images, but I think that we all deserve to see and know what we're taking part in when we go to the grocery store and when we go to restaurants. What went into the food that we're eating. In times past and for all of human history, animals were raised on smaller family farms. They were outside, they could look up at the sky, they were in the sun, there was grass, they were cared for and loved by their humans. Now, with the factory farms that began in the 1960s and the commercialization of our food, it's led to this situation where the animals are packed so tight they can barely move in tiny cages. I think the absolute most evil thing in all of this is the egg industry. They don't need male chicks, and so the moment that the boy chicks are born, they are ground to death without any anesthesia. It's horrible. I mean, all of our reactions to cute, sweet baby chicks, and they're ground to death. It's unhealthy for us too. Most of these animals are pumped full of hormones and antibiotics, which is creating antibiotic-resistant diseases. If you want to know more about the health aspect of the factory farms, I recommend a movie called Food Inc., which will be linked below with all the other resources. Another interesting quote about the treatment of animals that we're consuming comes from the International Theological Commission and their writing Communion and Stewardship. This is from chapter 3, paragraph 61. "The steward must render an account of his stewardship, and the divine master will judge his actions." And then paragraph 79. "Animals are the creatures of God, and according to the scriptures, he surrounds them with his providential care. Human beings should accept them with gratitude, and even adopting a Eucharistic attitude with regard to every element of creation, to give thanks to God for them. By their very existence, the animals bless God and give him glory. Bless the Lord, all you birds of the air. All you beasts, wild and tame, bless the Lord. In addition, the harmony which man must establish or restore in the whole of creation includes his relationship to the animals. When Christ comes in his glory, he will recapitulate the whole of creation in an eschatological and definitive moment of harmony. Number 5, the effects of cruelty to animals on humans, featuring Aquinas. Something we don't often think about when looking at this footage is that humans are required to treat the animals this way, to raise them and to take them to the slaughterhouse. When we're at the grocery store and restaurants, we're paying humans to abuse and torture and slaughter them. These horrific conditions of cruelty towards animals. Humans are being used to do that. Humans are exploited for this work. It's regular people who need jobs, who are desperate for work. There's a lot of immigrants, there's a lot of illegal immigrants who are exploited for labor as well. Aquinas discusses this in his Summa Contra Gentiles. He begins by discussing that it is not a sin to kill animals and to eat them and use them. Aquinas says that the Bible teaches against cruelty to animals, and that a main reason why humans shouldn't be cruel to animals is because then they could become cruel to each other. Indeed, if any statements are found in sacred scripture prohibiting the commission of an act of cruelty against brute animals, for instance, that one should not kill a bird accompanied by her young, that is said either to turn the mind of man away from cruelty, which might be used on other men, lest a person through practicing cruelty on animals might go on to do the same to men, or because an injurious act committed on animals may lead to a temporal loss for some man, either for the agent or for another man, or there may be another interpretation of the text as the apostle explains it, in terms of not muzzling the ox that treadeth the corn. Number 6, overpopulation. A final point I want to make is about a common abortion argument. We've heard so many politicians talking about how we need more birth control and even more abortions, especially in developing nations where they tend to have more children than in Western countries. The only reason it seems like we're dealing with scarce resources is because we're eating too much meat. 70% of the grain grown in the US is used to feed farm animals. 70%. In addition, 2,400 gallons of water is used to produce 1 pound of meat, while 25 gallons of water produces 1 pound of grain. As long as the norm in the world is eating meat, fish, dairy, and eggs, there will be constant talk about needing to birth control away our population, needing to encourage abortion all around the world. But if we change the perspective and start being more plant-based with the way we eat, and if we create this to be more of a norm, we will save so many resources. There will no longer be any starvation or lack of water going on in the world, because the grain and water that we currently are wasting on farm animals, we can instead feed to other humans. Whenever people bring up the abortion overpopulation thing, I always say that I'm a vegan and am fixing the problem, so definitely be vegan with me, and anytime someone brings up that argument, you can share how we have plenty of resources for the whole world if everyone commits to being more plant-based. I love you guys so much. Thank you for watching through to the end. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!